这条激波频道了吗？
对。你点那个之前分享过那个链接。
我刚才发现出来了。这方面是吧？
对。
OK， 我已经先看到了。 Never again.
Okay, let's start today. And good afternoon, dear all. And this is Mary Ye, Clinical Application Specialist from Epidemic and Hyphen. Thank you very much for your time to join our webinar on discussing the health workers' protection of fighting against COVID-19 and the Hfnc, which also known as high flow oxygen therapy in the treatment. And today, we will have two professionals to give the speeches, and please allow me to give an introduction to them. And the first one is Dr. Jiang Rongmeng, and which you can see just now in the pic. He is the Vice President, Chief Physician in Beijing Ditan Hospital, which is also known as Beijing Special Hospital for Infectious Diseases and affiliated to Capital Medical University. And he is also a member of the National Advisory Committee in Infectious Diseases in National Health Commission. And also he is member of National Expert Group of COVID-19, National Health Commission. He has a very fruitful experience on fighting against different infectious diseases like COVID-19, Ebola, SARS, and so on. However, it's very pity that he cannot make it to be here this afternoon, as he received a very, very urgent mission from National Health Commission yesterday. And because Guangzhou City in China now is facing up to a new round of COVID-19, which is origin from other countries, so he has to arrange all the related stuff. So I'm feel very pity about that, and I got his material very, very early in this morning, and later on we will have a look on it. And next is our profession. Our next profession is Dr. Wang Yibing, and he is Director of ICU, Chief Physician of Department of Critical Care Medicine, Beijing University Third Hospital at Haidian area, and his Executive Director of Beijing Physiological Science Association and Chairman of Professional Board of Critical Care Medicine, Beijing Association of Physiological Science. And now please allow me to have our Dr. Wang to say hello to you guys. Wondering.
Hi, hello. Hello, nice to meet you, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. It's my pleasure to come to here to discuss with you some medical problem.
Okay, and when back here, and next we will start our start speeches. The first part is our professional, like the health workers' protection when fighting against COVID-19. And please allow me to give a little bit explanation of today's procedure, like the process of today. The first part, I will give the material that Dr. Jiang and Dr. Wang, they were talking about the two segments. The first one is the health workers protection, and the second one is the Hfnc in the treatment. And after these two parts, we will have Q&A time about the Hfnc. And if you have any time at if you have any questions or concerns at any time, you could raise it up in the chat box in your Zoom or in our YouTube comment area. And we will have our colleagues here to communicate with you. And thank you very much.
According in the Epidemic panel report, in the last year, at least 17,000 health workers died from COVID-19. Some of them may be infected in the hospital. Some of them may be infected in the community. But however, whatever, when they were infected, but if a doctor or nurse infected COVID-19, we will work together. Maybe they will transmit it to us. So, health worker infected COVID-19, this is maybe cause a clot in the hospital. So, protect also not only in treated patient with COVID-19. Our colleagues is also very important to prevent COVID-19 infection. So today, I will give you some information about how to protect ourselves. Firstly, let us know the epidemiological characteristic of COVID-19. Second, the principle, hospital infection prevention and control. The third is the standard precautions. The next is isolation ward, how to set it. Then how to put it on and take off PPE. The last is the hand hygiene. And you can see, this contents tell us what is effective in protective. So first, let us learn the transmission of COVID-19. The person-to-person spread is the main mode of COVID-19 transmission. And it is occurred mainly through close-range contact, for example, with about 6 feet or 2 meters via respiratory particles. Virus released in respiratory secretion when a person with infection coughs, sneezes, or talks can infect another person if it is inhaled or makes direct contact with the mucous membranes. Also, infection might also occur through contact if a person's hands are contaminated by virus. For example, touching contaminated surface. For example, the mouse, the keyboards, then touch their eyes, nose, or mouth. Although contaminated surfaces are not thought to be a major route of transmission, but through contact get infection, we need to put attention. Besides the above transmitted route, COVID-19 can also be transmitted long distances through the urban route, especially in closed room, for example, in the elevator. In a few reports of healthcare workers exposed to patients with undiagnosed, the infection will use only contact or droplet precautions, not secondary infection, or identified despite the absence of urban precaution. COVID-19 has been detected in non-respiratory species, including stool, blood, ocular circulations, and semen, but the role of these sites in transmission is unclear. Then we know the trend of COVID-19 epidemic. In this picture, as you know, you can see the pink line is healthcare capacity. So if the pandemic outbreak exceeded extremely than the capacity, the COVID-19 would become a disaster. Then many patients cannot be isolation, cannot be treated. So the fatality rate will be exceed the disease itself. For example, last year in Wuhan, China, Italy, Spanish, and other cities, the fatality rate COVID-19 more than 6%. As you know, up to now, the average fatality rate of COVID-19 is about 2%. So how to control the COVID-19 outbreak is very, very important for government. Then let we know the goal of hospital infection prevention and control. The first, we need to prevent infection of medical staff. Then we prevent infection of patients, especially to prevent cluster of COVID-19. So we need a strict poisonous control. For example, each day we need measure temperature. If the fever patients, we guide them to fever clinic, and we take strict information registration, strict monitor of inpatient symptoms, for example, cough, fever, and take strict visitation management, strict escort management, strict management of medical staff and medical assistants, strict training of our staffs. Then we will take strictly prevent close infection in the hospital, trying to avoid contact with others, control the density of people in public spaces, such as outpatients and emergency departments, strictly control the 1 meter interval, strictly control the gathering of people, strictly control group meals. We also strengthen the training of infection prevention and control. We adhere to full staff training, no blind spots, especially for vulnerable groups. We adhere to program-oriented training, training to find out and fill the vacancies, train on new knowledge, new prevention and control measures, and the new developments in the prevention and control of COVID-19. Also, we develop training methods to flexible and both, and the new media training is often used. This slide introduces how to screen a suspected COVID-19, and we also emphasize everyone must have the awareness of COVID-19 prevention and control. It's not only fever clinic or infection department. So if a fever patient or who has suspected COVID-19 symptoms, for example, cough, fatigue, we will at the gate to screen the temperature. If they have any suspected symptoms, we will put them to the fever clinic. But it's not enough. We emphasize outpatient, emergency, and other key departments, for example, respiratory, infectious, pediatrics, is also have abilities to screen COVID-19. So you can see this is procession in China. All of the city, all of the hospital must abide by this procession. You can see we will give the patient a body temperature measure, ask suspected symptoms, and epidemiological history. Then we'll give them blood routine, nucleic acid test, lung CT. Then help us to diagnosis. And this picture you can see in our hospital. This hospital has 3 fever clinics. One is for local fever patients. One is for the fever patients from a high-risk area in China. And one is for overseas. This doctor put on PPE for local fever patients. Then we stress the pre-examination, triage, and the fever clinical medical institution. Medical institutions are the first or the post for the discovery of infection disease. They must leave isolation space and establish the concept of on-site isolation. Do pre-examination and triage, and make appointments for fever clinic by time. Each department and each clinic must have screen awareness. We emphasize every doctor must open by first visit responsibility. They need to pay attention to inquiries. Just as I said above, epidemiological history, cluster of cases, fever of unknown origin, focus on whether there are symptoms and signs of respiratory disease such as fever and cough. Then we take a hospital infection control standard precaution. All medical staff should strictly follow standard prevention, which is fundamental strategy to reduce the risk of hospital infection. I usually talk our doctors 3 sentences. The first is we need to treat all patients as potentially infectious. Then we take corresponding protective measures when contacting blood, body fluids, secretions, etc., etc. The last is we emphasize 2-way protection. For example, we put on PPE. It is not only for protect ourselves. Also, protect other people, our colleagues, patients, and other staff. So this is very important. And you can see the standard procedure including all of them in the hospital. For example, isolation, PPE, contact isolation and eye protection, airway prevention, hand hygiene, needle stick and sharp injury protection, medical waste safety management, equipment clean and disinfection, environmental clean. So do a good job of disinfection and isolation. Disinfection principles, instruments and articles that enter the human body, sterile tissue should be sterilized. Instruments and articles that contact skin and mucous membranes should be disinfected. Instruments and articles, in principle, clean and then disinfect. And the isolation principle include suspected patients and confirmed patients should be separated placement. They cannot be treated in a same room. The suspected patients should be placed in a single room. Different type of disease should be placed separately. So, for example, the mild symptom patients and the severe patients should be placed different room and different wards. And let's take how to isolate the source of infection. This is including viral isolation. For example, isolation ward. The isolation ward must suit. For example, in our country, the isolation ward has 3 areas, 2 channels, and a buffer zone. The 3 areas including clean area, semi-contaminated area, and the contaminated area. The 2 channels include separated channel for medical staff and the patients. Medical staff and the patients enter the area should not closed. And every areas between 2 areas must set a buffer zone. Then we put on PPE to protect ourselves. We wear masks for patients, and we teach the patients how to cough adequately. First, the type of room. Patients should be placed in a well-ventilated, thin, occupancy room with a closed door and a dedicated bathroom. An airborne infection isolation room, for example, single patient lactic pressure room, should be pre-aerated sized for patients undergoing air generating procedures. Then we introduce you the 3 areas, 2 channels how to set. The clean area include medical staff's shower rooms, toilets, locker rooms. The semi-contaminated areas, also known as potentially contaminated areas. These areas include medical staff's study rooms, toilets, offices, display classrooms, treatment rooms, nurse station, internal corridors, and others. The contaminated areas include wards, outer corridors, and the polluted ends. Then the bathroom is very important. The bathroom should be set up between clean area and the semi-contaminated area, and the polluted area. And there should be actual isolation barriers, such as isolation doors. And I noted the door need always closed. Otherwise, the bathroom cannot be useful. And this picture is a ward, hot setted, 3 areas and 2 channels. You can see the green area is clean area. The orange areas is semi-contaminated areas. You can see between clean area and the semi-contaminated area, there is a buffer rooms, and the red area is contaminated areas. Patients should be limited in the area, cannot enter other areas. So our medical staff must be put on PPE, then enter the red area to treat patient. So you can see between every area, between each areas must be a buffer rooms. Then you can see this is a special buffer rooms. This is for take off PPE. You can see this is there are 2 rooms for taking off PPE. This picture is maybe clear explain this. You can see we put on PPE through the 2 buffer rooms, then entering the red area. If we get in the clean area, we need take off in the first room and the second room, then enter the clean area. The left is example, and the right another example. I think the 2 pictures is same useful. Of course, the daily requirements for isolation ward. For example, the doors of each partition and the ward of isolation ward must be kept closed at all times. The isolation ward should be equipped with dedicated toilets and hand washing things. Then the stethoscopes, thermometers, fibromylometers, and other medical devices used for suspected patients should be dedicated for use. And the medical devices that are not dedicated for personnel are available before being used for other patients. It should be thoroughly cleaned and disinfected. The isolation ward should be equipped with disinfectant. The contaminated area should not be brought into the semi-contaminated area or clean area without effective disinfection. The patients with high-risk operations should be placed in the active pressure thin room for isolation ward. Of course, in our country, there is not enough active pressure room for isolate the patients. So we emphasize the routine ventilation is also important. So we can open windows for ventilation at least twice a day. Then we'll introduce you how to use the PPE. The PPE, including gown and gloves, respiratory or medical mask, eye and face protection, for example, goggles or face shield, power air purified respirator, and shoe covers. About respiratory or medical mask, you can see different guideline has default regarding how to use the medical mask or respirator. For example, the USA CDC recommends a respirator when caring for all patients with suspected or confirmed COVID-19. The medical masks are acceptable alternative only when the supply of respiratory is severely limited. But by contrast, the WHO states that a medical mask is insufficient in the absence of airborne generating procedure, but knowledge that providers may prefer a respirator when resources are low. Both guidelines agree that cloth masks are not considered sufficient PPE for medical staff and should not be worn for the care of patients. In our country, whatever we treated the suspect or confirmed COVID-19 patients, all of us use respirator mask. For example, N95 mask. Then we, according to different situation, put a different PPE. The first is a basic protection. We also named it level 1. It is suitable for medical staff in general outpatient and emergency clinic and general wards. The first we treated by the principle of standard precautions, where overalls and surgical masks when working, strictly implement high hygiene. The second is strengthened protection, is long of level 2. It is suitable for medical staff who works in a fever clinic and emergency. This including strictly abide by the principle of standard precautions, strictly abide by the rules and regulations of disinfection and isolation, where overalls, isolation gowns, work caps, surgical mask or medical protection mask, and gloves when necessary. Strictly implement hand hygiene. Carry out personal hygiene treatment when finishing work and paying attention to the protection of respiratory tract and mucous members. Then the level 3. It is suitable for medical personnel entering the ward for patients with suspected or confirmed COVID-19. The standard prevention abide by the rules and the regulations of disinfection and isolation. And the medical staff entering the ward or isolation ward must wear medical protective mask, isolation clothes or protective clothes, shoe covers, work caps and gloves when working, and strictly follow the division of clear area, potential polluted area and polluted area. Properly wear and take off PPE. This is positive pressure headgear. It's only for sputum collected. And next, when to use goggles, face shield, positive pressure headgears. Medical goggles, face shield, comprehensive respiratory protection to prevent liquid splashing or aerosol transmission. Isolation ward and isolation intensive care area and in the collection of respiratory tract specimens, sputum suction, non-invasive ventilation, tracheal intubation, tracheotomy. This need put on positive pressure headgear for respiratory protection and other operations where blood, body fluids, and secretions may be splashed. This is for personal protection for medical staff. Different situation, we can put different PPE. First, all medical staff should wear medical surgical mask during diagnosis and treatment activities. The second, in the pre-inspection and triage, this medical staff need to wear overalls, work caps, and medical surgical masks. When a doctor or nurse work in the fever clinic, respiratory outpatient clinic, emergency department, infectious disease department, and isolation ward, they will wear overall, disposable isolation gowns, work caps, and medical protective mask during daily diagnosis and treatment activities and runs. Wear goggles or face shield when taking respiratory samples, when in contact with blood, body fluids, secretions, or excrement, wear latex gloves. When medical staff take intubation, bronchoscopy, LV care, and sputum suction, aerosol or splashing operations may occur. They wear medical protective masks, goggles, and face shield, gloves, medical protective clothes. This tips is same important. The first is medical protective mask can be used continuously for 4 to 6 hours and should be replaced in time if they are polluted or wet. The second, after using the quick hand disinfectant 5 times in the isolation area, the gloves should be replaced. The third is isolation gowns can be used continuously when medical staff are in contact with multiple patients with similar infection disease. Then when the isolation gown is contaminated by the patient's blood, body fluids, or dirt, it should be repressed in time. Then wearing a medical protective mask should be undergo a facial tightness test. The last is medical staff working in the quarantine area should monitor their body temperature twice a day. If the temperature exceeds 77.3 centigrade, they need a report and the seek medical treatment in time. And the isolation is also necessary. So this slide is give you how to put on PPE procession. The first step is hand hygiene. The second, put on N95 mask and cap. In this step, we need tetanus test, and then put on isolation clothes or protective clothes. Then put on goggles or face screen. Then put on gloves, shoe covers.
Hello.
When we put on all of the items, we need check the PPE, then enter the contaminated area. The check is very important. We need colleagues, assistant to ensure the PPE meet requirements. You can see this is an example for put on PPE. As you know, in our country, we put on PPE maybe more serially. So you can take a level 2 PPE for caring the patients with COVID-19. When we finish the job, we will get out of the room. So we set 2 rooms to take off PPE. The first room included hand hygiene, take off goggles or face shield. Then take off protective clothing, boot covers and gloves. Then hand hygiene. In the second room, we will take off the inner shoe covers and the inner gloves. Then hand hygiene, take off cap, N95 mask. Then hand hygiene. The last is to wear a surgical mask. Then we will enter the contaminated area or clean area to get other works. So the last is hand hygiene is also important to us. The hand hygiene, according to WHO, we need hand hygiene before touching patient, before clean procedure, and after body fluid exposure risk, after touching patient surroundings. This is how to wash our hand. I emphasize here, we wash hand at least 40 to 50 seconds. Then our hands may be clean. So lastly, we will give you what is infective protection. There are 4 elements. The first is correctly put on and take off PPE. The second is carefully hand hygiene. Wearing gloves cannot replace hand hygiene. The third is protect all partitions. The last is room ventilation. It's same important. You can use natural wind, unidirectional airflow, circulation 6 to 8 times per hour, or lactic pressure. So last week, give you summary. The hospital infection control implementation standards precautions. Then we emphasize protect yourself, protect patients, and protect districts. The last is supervise each other, prevent patients and teammates. When we take all of the procedures, then we can save, and our patients can save. Thank you very much. This is all.
Hi, friends, doctors and nurses. It's my pleasure to communicate with you about a humidified high-flow nasal cannula oxygen therapy and CPAP. Let's review the respiratory system first. The larynx separates respiratory tract into upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. On the upper respiratory tract, the function of sinuses and nasal cavity are filtration, humidification, and warm-up by cilia, capillaries, and mucous glands. On the lower respiratory tract, there are 23 grade bronchus and 300 to 400 million of pulmonary alveoli. Below grade 6 bronchus, we call bronchioles. When we remove sputum from respiratory tract, we usually use sputum suction tubing or bronchoscopy. They only can insert grade 3 to grade 4 bronchus. So if we want to remove the sputum from a deeper respiratory tract, for example, remove the sputum from grade 20 bronchioles, we need to let the patients cough, move the sputum up and up to the main bronchus. Then we use the suction tubing, remove the sputum. So it's important to use this humidification, let the sputum become softer and thinner to be easy removed. Why we need the humidification? As we know, our airway water loss is a large amount. It will be 800 to 1,500 per 24 hours. If the patients have fever or artificial airways, the airway water loss will become much more than 1,500 ml. So let's say our oxygen system, in this bottle, only contain 200 to 300 ml water. If we want to evaporate all of the water in this bottle, it will take about 6 to 7 days. So regular nasal cannula and the ventilator mask system are almost without humidification. How about nebulizer? As we know, the nebulized fluid are molecular cluster that cannot reach the bronchioles, cannot reach the lower bronchioles, and sometimes can let the patient feel uncomfortable. Well, if we use the humidification, it is the water evaporation. That is the water molecules from water surface, so it can reach the terminal bronchioles. So humidification is much better than nebulizer. The nebulizer only used for send the medicine into the respiratory tract. Another point about why we need humidification is related to the anti-infection. Let's try to answer the question first. What is the first principle of anti-infection? The answer is reasonable, selective antibiotics based on the drug sensitivity test. Is this answer correct? Yes, I believe many doctors consider this answer is correct. But let's consider some situation. If the patient have abdominal infection, have a peritoneal abscess, have a cholecystitis, have a brain abscess, lung abscess, lung infection, can we use antibiotics only to control the infection? The answer is no. Because all of this situation, we need to take drainage first. So the correct answer is the first principle of anti-infection is drainage. The reasonable selected antibiotics is the second principle of anti-infection. Generalized speaking, for lung infection, the most important treatment is remove the sputum. The first step and the basic condition is humidification to let the sputum become softer, thinner, and easier to be removed by cough. So the sputum, get out of the sputum is first important anti-infection. The follow-up question is, what is a satisfactory humidification? There are 3 points we can consider. The first is the humidification temperature. As we know, saturated steam is the temperature close to the body temperature. So our humidification temperature should close to the body temperature. And the second point is the water consumption of humidification. It should about the water loss in respiratory tract. So the water consumption should about 1,000 to 1,500 ml per 24 hours. And the third point is we can observe the sputum is softer and thinner and easier to be removed by cough. So if we reach these 3 points, then we can make the sputum become thinner and softer. So basic airway nursing, as we know, is turn over the patient, knock back, and suction tubing. That's all based on satisfactory humidification. The next question is why we need high flow. As we know, if we want to prevent airway water loss, we should keep all of the inhaled air well humidified. All of the inhaled air are saturated steam. So let's have a question. How to calculate respiratory flow? For example, if the patient's respiratory rate was 20 BPM, IE ratio was 1 to 2, and the tidal volume was 500 ml. So what is the minute inspiratory flow rate to meet the patient's need? So let's calculate. Every breathing cycle is 3 seconds, and the inspiratory time is 1 second. The tidal volume was 500 ml per second. So the minimum flow rate should be 30 liters per minute. But this is only the average flow rate. As we know, the patient's inspiratory flow rate have a peak flow. We need to meet the peak flow. So we need to double of the average flow rate, at least. So the high flow oxygen system should have a 60 to 80 liters per minute flow rate. So we need to humidify all of the high flow air into the saturated steam. We can also say the regular oxygenation system like a nasal cannula or ventilator system only have a low flow oxygen system. Most of the inhaled air are dry air, not humidified air. Let's see the humidified high flow nasal cannula system. This is the flow meter connected to the air oxygen blender. The flow meter can provide 8 to 80 liters per minute flow rate. 8 liters per minute used for the small children. The oxygen blender can adjust oxygen concentration from 21 to 100%. And this is the heater, can heat the water into the temperature close to the body temperature. And the heated inspiratory circuit can keep the humidify the air in the same temperature, do not become the cooler. Here is a nasal cannula. So this all of this Hfnc system. The next, we want to answer the question, what is the core principle of correcting oxygen exchange disturbance? Heart correcting the hypoxemia. The basic principle is open the lung and keep lung open. We use continuous positive airway pressure can provide patients open the lung, keep lung open. As we know, when the patients have spontaneous breathing, when they inspiration, the airway pressure become negative. So negative airway pressure cannot always keep the lung open. So if we want always keep lung open, we need to elevate the baseline of airway pressure. Keep all of respiratory circuit in the positive area. We use the CPAP can also reduce the work of brakes. When we use the CPAP, the tidal volume and respiratory rate always determined by the patients. So patients will feel very comfortable. I see the Hfnc system plus CPAP system. This is the Hfnc system. The only difference is we replace the nasal cannula with the face or nasal mask. This is a CPAP mask, special CPAP mask. Like this. There are two holes. This tubing comes from a high flow system. This flow rate we have already know is 60 to 80 liters per minute. This is the Ppe valve. This Ppe valve can keep a resistance to the expiration. So we need to give the key point is we need to give enough flow rate to keep the PIP valve always open, that can keep the airway become positive pressure. If we cannot provide enough flow rate, sometimes the PIP valve become closed. The airway pressure sometimes may become negative. So when we use the CPAP mask, the keep PIP valve always open is very important. That tells us we need to keep enough flow rate, provide enough flow rate. What's the difference between CPAP and the PIP? As we know, the PIP used in ventilator support. In ventilator support, we usually use a control or assistant breathing. When the patient inspiration, the airway pressure always keep in the positive phase. When patient expiration, the airway pressure become lower from peak pressure. So if we want to keep all the airway pressure always in positive phase, we only add the peak positive and expiration pressure. We need not do all of them in the respiratory cycle. But in spontaneous breathing, when we inspiration, the airway pressure become negative. So we need elevate the baseline of airway pressure. So we need to provide CPAP. So CPAP used on spontaneous breathing. That's a difference. PIP used in ventilator support breathing. The CPAP used in spontaneous breathing. Let's see the physiological effect of Hfnc. Let's talk in 5 points. The physiological effect of Hfnc can reduce the nasopharynx anatomic dead space. As we know, the minute ventilation equal to the alveoli ventilation plus the dead space. We want alveoli ventilation up and the dead space become lower. So continues the high flow oxygen therapy can reduce pharynx anatomic dead space. That can reduce the carbon dioxide repeat inhalation, and also can increase the alveoli ventilation. So like ventilation efficiency become more elevate the ventilation efficiency. The physical effect of Hfnc can produce a positive airway pressure. That increasing functional residue capacity. By increasing, like a PEEP can increasing functional residue capacity, as we know. So the Hfnc and the CPAP also can increase functional residual capacity. The difference is the Hfnc can provide the constant flow rate. The airway pressure is the difference. Well, in CPAP, the flow rate is constant. A flow rate is changed, but the airway pressure is constant. Another benefit of physiological effect of Hfnc is protecting the airway mucosa, then can enhance the mucociliary clearing ability. As we know, there are pathological situations can hurt the mucociliary clearing ability. There are like asthma, lung infection, COPD, etc. Well, humidification, we can also help to protecting the mucociliary clearing ability. As we know, when the patient have a spontaneous breathing or cyanosis and the nasal cavity need to heating the cold air and need to humidify the inhaled air into the saturated steam. That need to burn the calorie. Or Hfnc can replace this function, so can save the body calorie consumption. Another physiological effect of Hfnc is reducing upper respiratory tract airway resistance and reducing work of breathing. As we know, the nasal pharyngeal cavity warm up and humidify the inhaled air. That can increase airway resistance. The airflow of Hfnc is more than spontaneous breathing flow. That can support nasal pharyngeal cavity larger, can reduce the airway resistance and reduce the work of breathing. I want to introduce a concept of a sequential step respiratory support. As we know, the nasal cannula and the ventral mask is our traditional oxygen therapy system. We have already discussed before. This system cannot humidify the air tract. that's not enough to humidify the airway tract. So we need to use a humidified high-flow nasal cannula system or plus CPAP to replace this traditional oxygen therapy system. Can keep the better humidification. If the Hfnc cannot support the patient enough, we need to switch into the non-invasive positive pressure ventilation in time. If non-invasive pressure support cannot support the patient enough, so we need to switch to the invasive positive pressure ventilation. We need to insert the trachea tubing in time. So this sequential step, respiratory support concept is very important. The difference between the Hfnc and the non-invasive respiratory support. The main point is the Hfnc cystillator coordination. The non-invasive ventilation need the patient coordinate with the ventilator very well. So in Hfnc, the patient feel much more comfortable. Sometimes in invasive ventilator support, the patient need sometimes struggle with the ventilator. The patient will feel uncomfortable. In the Hfnc, the patient's spontaneous breathing can also cough, and the airway protection better than non-invasive ventilator support. So Hfnc is suitable for mild to moderate type 1 respiratory failure. And the non-invasive ventilator support can be used on type 1 and type 2 respiratory failure. That's their difference. Next, let's talk about the clinical value of a humidified high-flow nasal cannula oxygen system. What clinical problem does it solve? For the first, they can humidification airway that can protecting the mucosa barrier for respiratory tract. That clear airway secretions can, if we clear the airway, can improve ventilation, can reduce the carbon dioxide retention, and also can remove the sputum and help overcome the lung infection. So we need to mention again the first principle of control infection is not reasonable selected antibiotics based on the drug sensitivity test. It is drainage. Remove the sputum in lung infection. The second point is the high flow nasal cannula oxygen system can provide the oxygen therapy at the right concentration. As we know, the COPD patient cannot be given high concentration oxygen. That will inhibit the patient breathing. So traditional oxygen therapy, if they give a high flow rate oxygen, that is a high concentration of oxygen, will inhibit COPD patients' respiration. Well, if we give a lower flow of oxygen, that will have not enough humidified the flow rate to the inhaled air. That will let the patient airway become dry. So the Hfnc can provide a low concentration of oxygen with a high humidified flow that can keep the airway become in a saturated state, can keep the sputum easy to be removed. In ARDS patients, the patient needs a high flow and a high concentration of oxygen. So the Hfnc system can also provide a high flow and a high concentration of oxygen, and especially with very well humidification. The third point is the high flow nasal cannula can keep open the lung and keep lung open. As we know, the high flow oxygen can reduce the work of breath, and the CPAP system can keep lung open. So that can improving oxygen exchange. I'd like to introduce some Chinese doctors' work. The Chinese expert consensus on clinical application of humidified high-flow nasal cannula oxygen therapy adult. This was published in 2019. Let's see the indication of Hfnc first. The Hfnc is suitable for mild to moderate type 1 respiratory failure. The oxygenation index between 100 to 300 milliacurie. And suitable for mild respiratory distress. The respiratory rate is over 24 BPM, and mild ventilatory dysfunction. And the Hfnc also used for the patient intolerant or contraindicated to the traditional oxygen therapy or non-invasive positive pressure ventilation. The control indications of Hfnc, relatively control indications, are severe type 1 respiratory failure, the oxygenation index below the 100 millibecquerel, and ventilatory dysfunction, the pH below the 7.3, and the patients have a contradictory breathing, and the patients have not enough ability to clear the airway. Or the patient have a severe blockage of the nasal cavity. The absolute contraindication is the patients without spontaneous breathing. The patients have a cardiac respiratory arrest and have an extremely severe type 1 respiratory failure. The clinical application of Hfnc. The Hfnc especially suitable for use in ARDS, like COVID-19 patients, can be used in severe pneumonia and other type of respiratory failure. Hfnc can also be used in patients just weaning from a ventilator, can extubate the tracheal tubing. Hfnc can also, if the patient cannot tolerate of a non-invasive ventilator, so we can try to use this kind of patients with Hfnc. This is the flowchart of clinical application of Hfnc in acute respiratory failure patients. Like we talked before, if the patients have a mild to moderate respiratory failure, oxygenation index below 300 and above 100, without tracheal intubation, the patients can try to use Hfnc. If the Hfnc not enough support the patient, we can try to use a non-invasive positive pressure ventilation. And if the patients need intubation, the tracheal tubing, we need to switch to the IPPV in time. So this is the flow chart to make decision how to use Hfnc or NIPV or IPPV. In extubation patients, in most of the situation, Hfnc is suitable for most of the situation. In traditional oxygen therapy. If the patient weaning from ventilator, we give ventilatory mask or nasal cannula. Usually, that patient's airway become dry, so some patients become reintubation later. If we use the Hfnc, we can reduce the reintubation rate. The application timing of Hfnc after extubation, the low risk of a standard for reintubation ICU. We should meet all of the following at the same time, like age is now so old, a patch score is now so high, etc. If we use in extubation patients, if the patient become too old, the patch score was very high, they will have a high risk standard of reintubation ICU. I want to introduce some study work on Hfnc. This work done by French doctor. Their work shows use a nasal high flow oxygen during the acute respiratory failure can help the patient increase the lung recruitment and increase the lung compliance and reduce the work of breaths and let the patient become a comfort and can also increase the oxygen pressure. Another French doctor's work shows the high flow oxygen through nasal cannula, acute hypoxemic respiratory failure can reduce the intubation rate compared to the standard oxygenation and non-invasive ventilation. Here is the Hfnc. The intubation rate is obviously lower. This work by the Thailand doctor. Their work approved using of the high flow nasal cannula for acute dyspnea and hypoxemia in emergency department. The patient use a high flow nasal cannula can obviously have a low dyspnea scale. This work has done by Chinese doctor. They published in last year high flow nasal oxygen in coronavirus disease, COVID-19 patients. with acute hypoxemic respiratory failure, a multi-center retrospective cohort study. Their conclusion shows early use high-flow nasal cannula oxygen therapy can be an effective respiratory support modality for COVID-19 patients with mild and moderate acute respiratory failure, and its use may reduce the need for tracheal intubation. Summary. Clinical application of a humidified high-flow nasal cannula oxygen therapy is suitable for the patients who need humidification and oxygen therapy should be considered a better choice of an early stage of oxygen therapy. We suggest this system should replace the traditional nasal cannula venturi mask oxygen system. And Hfnc plus CPAP used for ARDS hypoxemia patients like COVID-19 can control the disease earlier, can greatly reduce the patient's the chance of intubation and the using ventilator. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back. And yeah, it's me again. It's Mary here. Can you guys hear me? Okay. And tons of information. Okay, got it. Thank you. And tons of information, huh? And don't worry about that. We will share the materials to you all, and to review and or to discuss something. The epidemic of COVID-19 is because the long fight. So actually, not only our patients need to be taken care of very carefully, but also our doctors, our nurses, and all of our health workers should be taken care of. And that's why we invited Dr. Jiang, our first speaker, to give the speech, and then we also put our attention on these parts. And back to Dr. Wang's speech, actually, as an anesthesiologist before, I'm much more, familiar with anesthesia machines when compared to ventilators like VG70 or 510S or Hfnc like I7. So, Dr. Wang, would you please talk more about what is the difference between ventilator and Hfnc, and what are the advantages of them? Bonjour. A second.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just moved. Actually, I have already mentioned in my PPT. I want to review this slide here. Let's try to. Share my. Hold on. here. Oh, sorry. I want to share my screen.
Okay.
Would you please allow me to share my screen?
Sure. Wait a second. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, here. I have already mentioned in this slide, compared to the non-invasive positive ventilation, the Hfnc is a completely spontaneous breathing supporting system. That this Hfnc need not trigger the ventilator, because without ventilator support the patients. So the patient if the patient need not trigger the system, so no need for patient ventilator coordination. So the patient will feel very comfortable, much more comfortable than the ventilator support. Another point is the Hfnc is more easier for the patient to cough. That, as we know, the cough is very important function to the patients. If we want to remove the sputum from the lower respiratory tract, we need humidify the sputum, become softer and thinner, and let patients cough, move the sputum up and up to the main trachea. So the cough function is very important. So Hfnc can completely protecting the patient's this cough function.
So to my understanding, firstly, it's non-invasive, right? When
non-invasive,
yeah,
of course,
yeah.
that's a very important point, right?
Yeah, non-invasive, so it's more comfortable to our patients. That's very important, especially when it's used on our COVID-19 patients, right? It's non-invasive, it's more comfortable. And the second one is make our patients easy to cough, right? Because the humidify functions. And actually, I think it could be used on the general wards, right? It's not only used for COVID-19 patients, right? It's also could be used on the other type of patients, right?
Yeah, actually, in my point of view, I suggest we better use the Hfnc replace the regular traditional oxygenation system, like ventilator mask and nasal cannula, regular. I mean, because the traditional oxygen system do not have a humidification completely. So I suggest to use Hfnc. It can make the patient more comfortable and have a more protecting effect to the patient respiratory tract.
I see. This is another view from the clinical application, right? It's not only used for just these time or these period only for COVID-19 patients, but also our Dr. Wang think about it could be like instead of or say duplicate our original, the general oxygen humidify system like the ventry mask or the old one system, right?
Yeah, I suggest Hfnc should become a regular oxygenation system.
Whoa, that's a point. Thank you very much. Thanks. And
Thank you.
And is there any question that you guys could raise, or if you want to talk to Dr. Wang, or if you have any concerns, please let us know. You can open up your microphone to just talk to us, or you could put your questions or concerns in our chat box. Okay, and yep, it's from Rose. And actually, there is 2 questions from YouTube, because also we're also streaming on the YouTube now. And let me see the question from Rose. Is there any difference between Hfnc system and the high velocity system?
那是什么？我还没搞明白。
它那个应该是就是普通的那种高流量的氧气的那种，高流量的那种充氧的吧。因为我觉得最大的那个核心应该就是没有湿化，就是墙上我们挂的那一种。
Yeah, I think the main point is the flow rate. Hfnc, the flow rate is higher than regular high flow system, right? Because as I know, the Hfnc system usually have 60 to 80 liter per minute flow rate. It's much higher than regular high flow rate. And the most important is the humidification system is very powerful in Hfnc. So I suggest that we call the Hfnc. The first H is the humidification. That's a very important point. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the key. Yeah, like the key factor. High flow and also humidification. And
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to Rose. And there are 2 questions from Dr. I'm sorry, Myat, MYATKYAW. I'm very sorry about the pronunciation. Thanks to doctors. And doctor said, I think SARS-CoV-2 virus can be transmitted in any temperature. Is there any effects to the virus by temperature change? Is there any temperature effect on transmission of virus? And can we protect the COVID-19 transmission in India by current vaccines? And I think
this question I better leave for Professor Jiang. He's a specialist. I think better send this question to collect the question to the Professor Jiang. and let the Professor Jiang answer all of these questions on that.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. Suddenly burns to another new round of COVID-19 caused by the other countries. I'm sorry about that. And he just suddenly get very, very urgent permission from National Health Commission to send to have him arrange the related stuff. So I'm sorry he is not here for now, but we will collect all the questions to him and discuss with him very carefully and clearly. After all of this, we will send our materials with all of these answers and questions to you guys all. Okay. Mm-hmm. And this is another question from Carrington. Can this method you want to cater pediatric patients? Know that?
Yes.
Yeah. The answer is a very short
very
and
simple.
clear one. Yeah. Yes, we could use this on our pediatric patients.
As we can see, the flow rate, lowest flow rate was 8 liters per minute. This flow rate is special for the pediatric patients, right?
And is there any questions or concerns?
Oh, neonatal is another. Actually, as I know, the Hfnc only used for the patients age about, 2 years old, about. As I know, cannot use for neonatal, patients.
Anyway, the physiology of neonatal is completely. I would say, it's completely different from
neonatal. Newborn, mature enough.
Yeah. Okie dokie. That seems almost for today. And thank you very much for your time and attention. If you have any concerns, thanks to Dr. Wang and thank you all of you. And if you have any concerns, any interest or any questions, please feel free to let us know. And you could send us emails like marketing, marketing at eonmed.com, marketing@.com, or online at eonmed.com, or leave a message on our homepage, www.eonmed.com/en English. And wish all of us stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
结束。